The fifth cement truck roared across my great-grandfather's bridge, and I watched as the main support beam splintered under its weight. Timber that had stood strong for a century finally gave way, with a sharp crack that echoed through the valley. Across the creek, Deborah Kensington Price, the ever-smug president of our HOA, stood at her kitchen window, cradling her coffee like it was victory itself. A faint smile curved on her lips. She thought she'd won. Her plan was simple and cruel. Send one overloaded truck after another until the bridge collapsed, then declare it unsafe, get her emergency demolition order pushed through, and force me to sell the creekfront that had been in my family for 4 generations. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just some passive landowner waiting to be bullied into surrender. I was a retired Army Corps engineer, and every inch of that bridge was built into my bloodline. The smell of diesel exhaust hung thick in the morning air, stinging my lungs. My grandmother's china rattled in its cabinet like the bones of the past crying out. I stared at the cracks spidering through the oak beams my great-grandfather had cut with his bare hands and felt something shift inside me. The anger cooled. Rage became calculation. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I was engineering justice. She believed she'd broken me, but she had only triggered the blueprint for her own downfall. Before I show you how it all unraveled, you need to understand what was at stake. My name is Marcus Thornfield, and 3 months ago, I was just a 52-year-old retired engineer living quietly on the 40-acre stretch of land my great-grandfather carved out of the wilderness. Our home stood proud along Willow Creek, back when the area was all farmland and forest. Then came the Willowbrook subdivision, rows of identical houses, plastic fences, and a homeowners association with more greed than sense. They grew like weeds choking the life from an old garden, and soon my land was the last untouched patch in their path. The heart of our property was always the bridge. My great-grandfather had hewn every beam of it from local oak, his sweat and pride soaked into its grain. For generations, it stood as the link between our home and the world beyond. My grandfather proposed to my grandmother on that bridge beneath a harvest moon. My father taught me to fish from its railing, and years later, I carried my wife across it on our wedding day, just as I carried my newborn daughter in my arms. The air around it always smelled of linseed oil and honeysuckle. When you ran your fingers along the rail, you could feel the hand-playing grooves he'd left behind. On quiet mornings, before the HOA's invasion began, the creek would sing beneath the wood, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers that no suburban fence could contain. That bridge wasn't just a structure, it was the spine of our family's history. Life on the homestead used to move with the rhythm of the creek. Mornings began with the soft hum of cicadas and ended with the chirp of crickets beneath a sky unspoiled by streetlights. For 50 years, Willow Creek had been my sanctuary, a place where time slowed and history breathed. I'd spend my days repairing fences, tending the vegetable garden, and keeping the bridge in perfect shape. That bridge wasn't just wood and bolts to me. It was a living monument, whispering the voices of those who came before. But peace never lasts when greed sniffs opportunity. When the Willowbrook subdivision began its expansion project, I noticed survey markers creeping closer to my boundaries. At first, I brushed them off, some clerical mistake, I thought. But then came the letters. The HOA wanted to modernize the area, claiming my bridge was unsafe, my property outdated. They called it progress. I called it trespass. Each envelope felt heavier than the last, filled with legal jargon meant to intimidate. Deborah Kensington Price, the president with the perfect pearls and fake compassion, was behind it all. She wanted the creekfront, my creekfront, for her developers. That was when I realized this wasn't just about property lines. It was about power, and Deborah planned to erase every trace of the Thornfield name to get it. The day they sent the first cement truck, I was fixing the gate by the east pasture. The rumble came like thunder, and by the time I reached the creek, dust clouds were rising over the bridge. A crew of workers I'd never seen before were unloading supplies, acting like they owned the place. I flagged them down, told them they were trespassing. Their foreman waved a paper in my face, something stamped with HOA authority, and claimed they had temporary right-of-way. I could see the smirk behind his sunglasses. I knew a setup when I saw one. Deborah was testing me, probing for a reaction. I took photos, documented everything, and called the county office. The clerk said they hadn't issued any permits. It was all a bluff. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by blueprints and survey maps older than she was. I traced the creek's edge with my finger, following the same curves my great-grandfather once did when he drew the first outline of our land. He'd built that bridge to last through floods and storms, but not through bureaucratic sabotage. I decided then that if they wanted a fight, I'd give them one. Not with fists, but with precision. Deborah might have thought she was dealing with an old man clinging to memories. She was about to learn she'd picked the wrong engineer to provoke. By the time the third truck crossed, I already knew what she was doing. Overload the structure, stress the joints, force a collapse. It was textbook manipulation. Create a hazard, then justify removing it. I'd warned the HOA repeatedly that the bridge was never rated for heavy industrial loads, but they ignored every report I sent. The trucks came anyway, one after another, their engines roaring like defiance. I watched from my porch as the timbers groaned and the bolts strained under pressure. The wood that had weathered 100 years of storms began to splinter at its core. I should have been furious, but I wasn't. I was recording everything, timestamps, axle weights, stress points. Every frame was evidence. Every crack, a confession. My neighbors didn't understand why I didn't run out there to stop them. But I knew better. You can't stop corruption with anger. You destroy it with proof. When that fifth truck finally broke the beam, I stood silent, the creek swallowing the echoes of destruction. Deborah smiled from across the water, thinking the game was over. What she didn't know was that I'd already set mine in motion. Deborah Kensington Price wasn't always an enemy. Years back, when Willowbrook first sprouted up, she came by with a basket of muffins and that lawyer's charm. Claimed she wanted neighborly cooperation. I should have seen the ambition beneath her smile then. A former corporate attorney, she traded skyscrapers for cul-de-sacs, but never left her hunger for control behind. She built her little empire of bylaws and fines, ruling the neighborhood like a polished tyrant. Her word was law, her tone sweet poison. She had everyone fooled. Retirees adored her, new homeowners worshipped her, and the local council bent under her influence. But I'd studied her type before, people who think rules only apply to others. She saw my family's land as an obstacle, not a legacy. The creek, the bridge, the trees, it all stood in the way of her planned development. To her, heritage wasn't sacred, it was negotiable. When the bridge broke, she thought she'd finally cleared her path. I could almost hear her rehearsing her victory speech. Unsafe structure, uncooperative owner, emergency order. What she never expected was that I had a longer memory and a better plan. I spent the night at my drafting table, surrounded by the ghosts of my trade, rulers, compasses, and the scent of graphite. The rhythmic tick of the old clock echoed like my heartbeat. Every broken beam, every fracture became data. I calculated load distribution, impact stress, and failure sequence. The pattern was clear, deliberate overload. I wasn't just going to rebuild the bridge. I was going to expose her scheme using the same precision I'd used to build dams and levees across the country. I pulled the county archives, retrieved property records, traced every permit she'd forged. Deborah's paper trail was messy, hidden under HOA legalese, but numbers don't lie. Within hours, I found inconsistencies, illegal easements, unauthorized modifications, and financial kickbacks to a local contractor. It was a goldmine of corruption, buried under signatures. By dawn, my anger had crystallized into focus. I wasn't Marcus the homeowner anymore. I was Marcus the engineer again, the man who could turn pressure into design. And soon, I'd make sure Deborah's empire of paperwork crumbled just like my bridge. Before rebuilding, I walked the ruins of the bridge. The air was heavy with sawdust and grief. The broken timbers lay scattered like fallen soldiers, each one telling a story of endurance. I could still trace my great-grandfather's chisel marks beneath the soot. It hurt more than I expected, losing something so deeply tied to my bloodline. The creek murmured beneath, carrying fragments of oak downstream, as if mourning its guardian. But amid the sorrow, I felt clarity. This was no longer just about saving a bridge. It was about defending every memory embedded in that land. My father once told me that structures outlive men only when built with purpose. Now I understood what he meant. Deborah had tried to erase a piece of my family, but she'd only strengthened my resolve. I picked up one of the fallen planks and brushed the dirt off. "You're coming back," I whispered. And this time, it wouldn't just stand against storms, it would stand against corruption itself. The next week was spent buried in paperwork, both mine and hers. I scoured the county records, cross-checking every permit, land transfer, and zoning application linked to the Willowbrook expansion. Deborah's fingerprints were everywhere. Her signature appeared on documents she had no authority to sign, and payments had been funneled through shell accounts to her husband's contracting firm. It was a tangled web of greed disguised as community improvement. Each discovery was another nail in her coffin. I compiled it all into a dossier thicker than any bridge manual I'd ever written. At night, I'd sit by the broken creek crossing, watching the moonlight reflect on the shattered wood, reminding myself what I was fighting for. I didn't just want her fined or shamed, I wanted her exposed. I contacted a few old colleagues from the Army Corps, experts in infrastructure failure, and asked them to verify my findings. They confirmed what I already knew. No natural wear could have caused the collapse. It was sabotage. With their written statements and my evidence, I was ready to strike. But I knew timing mattered. Deborah thrived on control. To beat her, I'd need to let her think she still had it. When Deborah called to discuss the incident, I played the role she expected, the broken old man defeated by bureaucracy. I let my voice tremble just enough to feed her ego. She invited me to her pristine kitchen, where every surface gleamed with artificial perfection. "Marcus, dear," she said, sipping her imported tea, "we both know the bridge was unsafe. The HOA just wants what's best for everyone." Her tone dripped with practiced sympathy. I nodded, pretending to agree, even complimenting her diligence. Behind her, through the window, I could see the wreckage of my bridge, her trophy. But every smile I gave her was calculated. I let her talk, let her gloat, and subtly asked questions about the trucks, the contractors, and the permits. She bragged more than I'd hoped. People like her always did. I recorded every word on the pen recorder in my pocket. By the time I left her kitchen, I had everything I needed, her confession wrapped in charm. She had no idea the man she'd underestimated was already dismantling her entire operation one polite conversation at a time. With the evidence secured, I turned back to the bridge. I couldn't let my ancestors' work end in ruin. I ordered fresh oak from a local mill, the same species my great-grandfather had used. The scent of sawdust filled the air as I planed each beam by hand, working from the original blueprints I'd inherited. Every strike of the hammer felt like reclaiming a piece of our history. Neighbors came by to watch, some offering help, others just silent respect. Even the younger families who'd moved in from the subdivision seemed drawn to the restoration. They'd grown tired of Deborah's authoritarian rule and whispered their frustrations to me. I listened, offering nothing but a nod. The bridge wasn't just being rebuilt, it was becoming a symbol of resistance. By the time the frame rose again over Willow Creek, it stood not only on new supports, but on renewed spirit. I carved my great-grandfather's initials into the first beam, then added mine beside it. Our lineage wasn't just surviving, it was standing taller than ever. Rumors started circulating through Willowbrook. People began questioning Deborah's decisions, her sudden push for emergency demolitions, her secret meetings with developers. I didn't need to fuel the gossip. Truth spreads naturally when lies lose footing. She called an HOA meeting to regain control. I attended, sitting quietly in the back as she launched into a speech about safety and modernization. But her confidence wavered when residents started asking hard questions, questions I'd subtly encouraged them to ask. One man mentioned the unauthorized trucks. Another brought up the missing maintenance funds. Deborah's voice trembled for the first time. I said nothing, just observed, letting the seeds of doubt bloom around her. When the meeting ended, she avoided my eyes. She must have sensed that something was shifting. Power was slipping from her manicured fingers, and she didn't even know how deeply the cracks ran beneath her foundation. The official hearing took place 2 weeks later. Deborah arrived in her tailored suit, armed with fake charm and forged documents. But I came prepared with truth and allies. My engineering colleagues testified first, explaining the structural evidence of deliberate overload. Then I presented the financial records, her emails, her voice recording. The room grew colder with every exhibit I laid before the county board. Deborah's face lost color when they played her own voice admitting she needed that bridge gone to move forward. It was the sound of arrogance collapsing. Her lawyer tried to object, but the board overruled him. The verdict came swiftly. All HOA construction projects were suspended pending a full investigation. Deborah Kensington Price was removed from her position indefinitely. As the gavel struck, I didn't celebrate. I simply exhaled. For the first time in months, the weight had lifted. But my fight wasn't finished. Justice wasn't about humiliation. It was about restoration. By early spring, the new bridge was complete. It wasn't a replica. It was an evolution. The same oak heart, reinforced with modern precision. The first time I crossed it, the boards creaked softly beneath my boots, as if greeting an old friend. The creek shimmered below, alive again. Families from both sides came to watch the ribbon cutting. Children tossed flowers into the water, and even the county commissioner showed up to commend the project as a symbol of community resilience. I didn't make a speech. I just ran my fingers along the railing, feeling the grain and warmth of the wood. My great-grandfather's spirit lingered there, and for the first time in a long while, I felt peace. The bridge had always been more than timber. It was proof that integrity, once broken, could be rebuilt stronger than before. The investigation into Deborah's dealings spread like wildfire. The media picked up the story, dubbing it the bridge scandal. Developers withdrew their contracts, investors vanished, and her reputation burned faster than dry pine. Her husband's company folded under scrutiny, and their assets were frozen. I didn't gloat when I saw her house for sale. I just nodded quietly. Karma had a way of collecting its debts. Months later, I received a letter from her. No apology, just bitterness. She blamed everyone but herself. I read it once, then fed it to the fire pit. Some bridges, I realized, weren't meant to be rebuilt. In the months that followed, I found new rhythm in my days. The bridge became a gathering place again. Neighbors walked their dogs across it, kids fished from its edge, and the scent of honeysuckle returned along the banks. I taught a few local students about old-fashioned carpentry, showing them how to work wood with patience, not machines. Each groove, each nail, was a lesson in endurance. The land felt alive again, as though the soil itself had forgiven the scars left by greed. Sometimes I'd pause mid-work and just listen to the laughter, the creak, the echo of legacy. I'd realized something profound. History isn't preserved by documents or deeds. It's preserved by the hands willing to rebuild what others tried to destroy. One evening, I sat by the creek with a pen and paper, writing to my daughter who lived 3 states away. I told her everything, how the bridge fell, how it rose again, and what it taught me about resilience. Our land, I wrote, isn't valuable because of what it's worth, but because of what it carries. I described the smell of oak and the hum of the water beneath. I wanted her to know that some things, once lost, can still be restored through will and truth. When I sealed the letter, I felt the bridge behind me glowing in the twilight, sturdy and eternal. I knew someday she'd walk across it and understand exactly what her ancestors fought to protect. As summer rolled in, the water level dropped, revealing stones long hidden beneath the surface. I found one carved faintly with initials, JT, my great-grandfather's mark. I traced it with my thumb, smiling. Nature had preserved what even corruption couldn't erase. That night, fireflies flickered over the bridge like tiny lanterns, and I could almost hear his voice in the rush of the creek. Hold the line. It wasn't just a message. It was a command that had traveled through generations. I sat there for hours, letting the whispers of the past mingle with the peace of the present. The fight was over, but its meaning would endure forever. Without Deborah's rule, the HOA fractured. Residents voted to dissolve it entirely, choosing instead to manage things collectively. The irony was almost poetic. The very system built on control gave birth to cooperation. We met monthly by the bridge, under the old willow tree, discussing repairs, sharing food, and laughter. The community that had once been divided by greed was now bound by shared history. Some even helped plant trees along the creek, ensuring future generations would know what resilience looked like. I realized then that victory wasn't measured in lawsuits or headlines. It was in the harmony of neighbors rebuilding trust, one board at a time. Years have passed since that day the bridge fell, but every time I cross it, I feel my ancestors walking beside me. The oak still carries their fingerprints, the creek their reflection. I'm older now, slower maybe, but my heart is light. I've seen how corruption can rot even the strongest structures, but I've also seen how truth can rebuild them stronger. The bridge stands not just as wood and bolts, but as proof that heritage cannot be erased by greed. It endures, like the current beneath it, ever flowing and alive. Sometimes, when the sun sets just right, the bridge glows golden, and I swear I can hear my great-grandfather's laughter in the wind. The land is safe, the creek still sings, and the Thornfield name remains carved deep in the heart of Willow Creek, forever unbroken.